For centuries, we believed we understood the story. A simple, clean story of who we are, a beginning, a middle, and an end. But in the year 2019, in a room cooled to a precise chill, a different kind of mind was looking at our story. It was not a human mind. It was an artificial intelligence, a silent observer tasked with one of the most human questions imaginable. Where do we come from? It sifted through the genetic codes of over 1,000 individuals, reading the 3 billion-letter book of life that each person carries within them. It was looking for a pattern, a simple equation to confirm what we already knew. And it failed. The pattern wasn't clean. The equation didn't solve. When the machine tried to build the model of the Japanese people using the known ingredients, the known ancestors, there was something left over, a residual, a percentage of our very being that came from nowhere, from no known source. The scientists who guided this intelligence ran the models again and again, and each time the same shadow remained. A set of genetic markers that did not belong to any known ancestral group that could not be explained. They had a name for it, a name borrowed from the language of data, but one that chills us to the bone. They called it the ghost lineage. A ghost? A fourth ancestor, silent, nameless, hiding in the double helix of everyone. Perhaps even in you. It's a story that connects the deep, ancient past to this very moment, this very second you are listening. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Where are you listening to this from? What time of night is it? Is it late? Are the lights low? If this story, this search for a lost ancestor, resonates with you, perhaps you can let us know. A simple like tells us you are on this journey with us. Subscribing ensures you won't miss the next step as we descend deeper into the mystery. And if you feel moved, leave a comment telling us the city or town and the time that you are joining this story from. It's a beautiful thought. All of us, separated by miles and time zones, all listening together, searching for the same ghost. And to understand just how profound this shadow is, we must first understand the story it interrupted. We must first walk through the grand, beautiful museum of our known history, the one we thought was complete. Our story, the official one, begins over 16,000 years ago. It begins with the first people to call this archipelago home, the Jomon. These were not simple peoples. They were a sophisticated culture of hunter-gatherers who lived in a world that was just shrugging off the last great ice age. They were the world's first potters, crafting intricate cord-marked vessels. Jomon means cord pattern, thousands of years before anyone else on Earth. They lived in these lands for over 10,000 years. 10,000 years. An almost unimaginable span of time. An empire of time, not of land. They hunted, they fished, they foraged, and they developed a deep, complex spiritual world. We see it in their haunting dog figurines, with their goggled eyes and alien forms. For millennia, they were alone, isolated by the rising seas, and they became a people entirely unique to this part of a world. A people whose genetic signature is a deep, foundational root of modern Japan. This was ancestor number 1. For a long time, we thought they were the only story. And then the world changed. Around 3,000 years ago, or perhaps a little earlier, a new wave of people arrived. They came from the continent, from Northeast Asia, sailing across the sea. We call them the Yayoi. They brought with them a revolution. They brought rice. Not just the grain, but the entire technology of paddy cultivation. They brought bronze, they brought iron, and with them they brought a population explosion. This was not a small migration. This was a genetic tidal wave. The Jomon, who had lived in small, stable communities, were met by this wave of newcomers. For a long time, we pictured this as a conquest, a replacement, the farmers overtaking the foragers. But the genetic story, as it always is far more complicated and far more human. They mixed. They intermarried. The Jomon blood was not erased. It was diluted, woven into a new tapestry. This new combined genetic profile, Jomon and Yayoi, became the dominant signature. This was ancestor number 2. This two-part story, Jomon plus Yayoi, seemed complete. It explained the shift from hunting to farming, and it seemed to fit the faces, the language, and the genetics. It was a neat, two-act play. But then, just a few years ago, science refined the story again. In 2021, a major study from Riken, Japan's great scientific research institute, confirmed a third wave. This wave came later, during what we call the Kofun period, the era of the great keyhole-shaped tombs, around 1,600 years ago. This group, likely from the area of modern China, were the state builders. They brought horses, a new political structure, and the complex systems that would eventually forge the first Japanese state. They, too, intermarried and mixed, adding another layer of thread to the tapestry. So the new perfect equation was born. Jomon plus Yayoi plus Kofun. 3 great migrations, 3 ancient peoples, all merging to create the modern people of Japan. Ancestor number 3. It was beautiful. It was elegant. It was a complete story. And it was wrong. Or at least, it was incomplete. Because we returned to that room in 2019, we returned to the artificial mind that could not solve the equation. The Jomon. It has a genetic signature. We can read it. The Yayoi. We can read theirs too. The Kofun. Their markers are clear. But when the AI took the DNA of a modern person and subtracted these 3 known, massive ancestral groups, that shadow still remained, that ghost lineage. It wasn't Jomon. It wasn't Yayoi. It wasn't Kofun. It was something else. This is the anomaly. This is the mystery at the heart of our story. Who is this fourth ancestor? Where did they come from? And, perhaps the most haunting question of all, where did they go? Why did they leave no pottery, no tombs, no name? Nothing but a faint genetic echo in our blood. Our journey tonight is to hunt for this ghost. We must step out of the tidy museum of our known history and into the shadows. We must search for a people who lived and died and were forgotten by everyone, except, it seems, by our very own DNA. Oh, understand what's missing. We must first master what's known. We have to build the perfect story, layer by layer, so that when the cracks appear, we can see exactly where they are. And that story, that foundation, is built on 3 monumental pillars. Pillar 1 is Jomon. To call them just hunter-gatherers is a disservice to a civilization that thrived for 100 centuries. Imagine a world without farming, yet with complex villages that lasted for generations. In the lush forests of ancient Japan, rich with nuts, berries, and teeming rivers, the Jomon didn't need to wander constantly. They settled. They built substantial pit dwellings sunken into the earth for warmth, with thatched roofs rising like gentle hills against the skyline. Their pottery, some of the oldest on the planet, wasn't just functional, it was extravagant. We find vessels with rims that explode into flame-like shapes. intricate cord markings that required immense patience and skill. These weren't just pots for cooking, they were expressions of a deep, shared culture. And their spirituality is even more fascinating. The dog figurines, over 20,000 have been found, are mostly broken, intentionally. A leg snapped off here, an arm there. Were they effigies used in healing rituals? Were they prayers for safe childbirth? We don't know for sure, but they speak to a complex inner world, a way of attempting to control the uncontrollable forces of nature. Genetically, the Jomon were distinct. They had been isolated for so long since the end of the last ice age that their DNA drifted away from their cousins on the Asian mainland. They developed unique traits. Studies of their skulls show deep-set eyes, prominent nose bridges, and rugged jawlines. They were adapted to a life of physical rigor in a temperate climate. But here's the crucial thing. The Jomon were not a single monolithic block. They were a mosaic. Think of the vast distance from the snowy forests of Hokkaido in the north to the subtropical coral islands of Okinawa in the south. It would be absurd to think everyone lived the same way. In the north, they hunted sea mammals, bear, and deer. Their tools were heavy, adapted for processing thick hides and large game. In the south, they relied more on the sea, on shellfish, on the bounties of the coral reefs. This regional diversity is key. It's the first hint that even our Pillar 1 isn't as simple as it looks. The people who would eventually become the Ainu in the north and the Ryukyuan people in the far south. Both carry the strongest genetic legacy of these ancient Jomon. They are the bookends of the archipelago, preserving the oldest chapters of the story most clearly. The Ainu language, for instance, is an isolate. It has no known relatives on Earth. It's a linguistic ghost of a world that has otherwise vanished. Their traditional bear ceremonies, their intricate wood-carving patterns, these are echoes of a deep Jomon spirituality that persisted in the north long after it had faded elsewhere. So, for 10,000 years, this was the world. A stable, rich, complex world of diverse tribes, united by a common thread of pottery and a shared adaptation to their island home. This was the baseline, the canvas upon which everything else would be painted. Then, Pillar 2 arrived, and it didn't just add to the picture, it completely repainted it. Around 3,000 years ago, the Yayoi period began. It started in the south, in Kyushu, closest to the Korean peninsula. And it wasn't a slow trickle of change. It was a deluge. The new arrivals brought a package of technologies that would fundamentally alter the human relationship with the land. The most important was wet rice agriculture. Rice is a demanding god. It requires flat land, controlled water, cooperative labor. You cannot grow a rice paddy alone. You need a village. You need irrigation channels, dikes, organized planting and harvesting schedules. This new way of life demanded a new social structure. The Yayoi people lived in larger, more permanent settlements, often surrounded by moats and defensive earthen walls. Why defenses? Because now, for the first time, there was something worth stealing in large quantities: stored grain. Wealth had been invented, and with it, its dark twin, war. We begin to find skeletons from this period with arrowheads embedded in their bones, bearing the distinct marks of violent trauma. The era of peace was over. They also brought metal, bronze for ritual, magnificent, enormous ceremonial bells called dotaku, buried in hillsides for reasons we still don't fully understand, and iron for tools and weapons. An iron axe could clear a forest 10 times faster than a stone one. The landscape itself began to change, tamed by these new, sharper tools. The genetic impact was staggering. The Yayoi population exploded. Farming can support far more people per square mile than hunting and gathering. In a relatively short span of a few centuries, the genetic landscape of Japan tipped. The newcomers' DNA became dominant. Their faces were different, too, flatter with shallower features, adapted perhaps to the colder, drier climates of Northeast Asia from whence their ancestors came. But it wasn't a total replacement. It was a blending. In some areas, the Jomon held on longer. In others, they adopted the new ways quickly. It was a centuries-long process of interaction, trade, intermarriage, and sometimes conflict. The modern Japanese genome is a direct result of this mixing, a base of Yayoi with a significant foundational layer of Jomon. For decades, this Jomon-Yayoi duality was the model. It was neat. It explained the archaeology and the genetics as we understood them at the time. But science never stands still. And that brings us to Pillar 3, the Kofun. Until recently, the Kofun period, named after the massive keyhole-shaped burial mounds that dot the landscape, was seen just as a continuation of the Yayoi, a natural political evolution. But geneticists began to notice another shift, a third pulse of DNA entering the mix around the 3rd to 7th centuries AD. These weren't just more farmers. These were elites, craftsmen, administrators. They likely came during a time of great turmoil on the Asian continent, refugees and opportunists from the falling Han Empire and the chaotic Three Kingdoms period. They brought with them the tools of statecraft. They brought the writing system that would become kanji. They brought advanced engineering for building massive tombs and controlling whole river systems. They brought horses, and the complex culture of mounted archery that would eventually evolve into the samurai tradition. This third wave was crucial. It was the catalyst that turned loose confederations of rice-farming villages into a unified state under the nascent Yamato court. They didn't just add DNA. They added the software of civilization, the bureaucracy, the laws, the intricate social hierarchies. So there we have it, the perfect story. Ancestor 1, the Jomon, provides the deep, indigenous roots, the connection to the land and a unique spiritual base. Ancestor 2, the Yayoi, provides the agricultural engine, the population base, and the metal tools. Ancestor 3, the Kofun, provides the political structure, high culture, and the final genetic ingredients to forge the modern state. Jomon plus Yayoi plus Kofun, Seedorus, Japan. It's a compelling narrative. It fits the pottery shards, the ancient rice paddies, the giant tombs. It fits the history books. It should be enough. But then you run the numbers. You take that deeply complex AI, you feed it all this data, the thousands of complete genomes of modern people, the ancient DNA painstakingly extracted from Jomon teeth and Yayoi petrous bones, and you ask it to balance the equation. And it refuses. The computer says, no. It says, there is a piece missing. When you subtract the genetic contributions of the Jomon, the Yayoi, and the Kofun from the modern Japanese genome, the result is not 0. There is a remainder, a stubborn, persistent, statistically significant ghost in the data. It's not a huge percentage, but it's there in almost everyone. It's like finding a strange, unknown spice in a dish you thought you knew every ingredient of. You can taste it, It's definitely there, but you can't find it in the pantry. This residual doesn't match any modern population in China or Korea or Siberia. It doesn't match the ancient DNA we have from other parts of Asia. It's a unique signature, a genetic footprint of a people who came, contributed their blood to the ancestral stream, and then vanished without leaving a single recognized archaeological trace. No distinct pottery style has been linked to them. No specific type of burial. They are, quite literally, ghosts. They must have been here. They must have lived, loved, raised children, and died on these islands. They must have interacted with the others. Were they here before the Jomon? A super-archaic group that barely survived the Ice Age? Or did they arrive between the great waves? A lost migration that history forgot to record. The perfect story has a crack in its foundation, and it is through this crack that we must now travel into the uncharted territory of the unknown. We have to leave the brightly lit halls of established history and step into the fog. Because somewhere in that fog, our ghost ancestor is waiting to be found. It's a strange feeling, isn't it, to realize that a part of you might come from a complete mystery. It makes you look at your own reflection a little differently. I'm curious, while you're pondering this mystery, where in the world are you right now? And what time is it for you? It's fascinating to think of us all connected by this same story, across so many different places and time zones. Let me know down below. Before we try to identify our specific Japanese ghost, we need to zoom out, way out. We need to realize that ghosts in our DNA aren't actually that unusual. In fact, the story of humanity, Homo sapiens, is less of a lonely march to glory and more of a crowded, messy, interspecies block party that lasted for tens of thousands of years. For most of the 20th century, the prevailing view was that we were unique. We, Homo sapiens, were the smart ones, the creative ones, the ones who made art and language. The others, like the Neanderthals, were just brutish evolutionary dead ends. Knuckle-draggers who grunted in cold caves until we came along and outcompeted them. We were the chosen species, destined to be alone. Genetics shattered that arrogant little fairy tale. In 2010, the first draft of the Neanderthal genome was published. It was a bombshell. It turned out that those brutes hadn't just vanished. They had met us, and we hadn't just fought them. We had mated with them. If your ancestry is from outside sub-Saharan Africa, Europe, Asia, the Americas, you are walking around right now with roughly 2% Neanderthal DNA in every cell of your body. Think about what that means. It means that thousands of times, in the deep, frozen forests of Ice Age Eurasia, a modern human and a Neanderthal looked at each other and saw not an alien, not a monster, but a partner. They had children together, and those children survived, and had children of their own, an unbroken chain of life that leads directly to you. And we now know Neanderthals weren't simple brutes. They buried their dead, sometimes with flowers. They made jewelry out of eagle talons. They likely created the world's oldest cave art. Red handprints and geometric shapes in Spanish caves that predate Homo sapiens' arrival in Europe by 20,000 years. They were a different kind of human, yes, with heavier brows and stockier, immensely powerful bodies adapted for the brutal cold. But they were human nonetheless. They had complex minds and perhaps even a form of language. That 2% isn't just genetic noise. It influences our immune systems, our skin, even our propensity for certain moods. The ghost of the Neanderthal is not silent. It's whispering in our very biology. But if finding the Neanderthal in our blood was a shock, what happened next was a genuine paradigm shift. It started with a tiny fragment of bone, just the tip of a pinky finger, found in a remote cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia. The cave was called Denisova. It was 2008. Russian archaeologists had been working in the cave for years. It was a treasure trove of ancient layers, a perfect shelter used by humans and predators alike for hundreds of thousands of years. They found this tiny bone in a layer dated to around 40,000 years ago. They assumed it was just another Neanderthal, or perhaps an early modern human. It didn't look like much, just a scrap. But when they sent it to a lab in Germany to have its DNA sequenced, the results were impossible. It wasn't a Neanderthal, and it wasn't us. It was a completely new, previously unknown species of human. We had no skull, no complete skeleton, just a pinky bone, and later, a few massive, strange-looking teeth. Yet, the DNA was undeniable. They named them the Denisovans, after the cave. Imagine that. An entire branch of the human family tree, discovered not through a century of digging up fossils, but through a single chemical analysis in a lab. A true ghost species. And, just like the Neanderthals, they didn't stay in their Siberian cave. Their DNA tells a story of a vast, sprawling population that likely lived across much of Eastern Asia for tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of years. And, inevitably, they met us. The genetic imprint of the Denisovans is even more fascinating than the Neanderthals. While Neanderthal DNA is spread pretty evenly across all non-African populations, Denisovan DNA is strangely specific. It's found in low levels in mainland Asia, but it reaches massive peaks, up to 5 or even 6%, in the people of Melanesia, in places like Papua New Guinea and Bougainville Island, and in the indigenous Aboriginal Australians. Think about the geography of that. A pinky bone in Siberia and living descendants in the tropical islands of the South Pacific, thousands of miles away. It implies a deeper, more complex history than we can almost fathom. It means Denisovans were likely seafaring, or at least capable of crossing major water barriers that separated ancient Asia from the prehistoric supercontinent of Sahul, Australia and New Guinea. It means they were adapted not just to the cold steppes of Siberia, but possibly to tropical rainforests as well. They gave modern humans incredible gifts. The Tibetans, for example, have a special gene that allows them to thrive at immensely high altitudes without their blood thickening dangerously. Most of us would get chronic mountain sickness living where they do. Where did they get this superpower? From the Denisovans. It was a genetic gift, acquired through interbreeding, that allowed our species to conquer the roof of the world. So, the world of 40 or 50,000 years ago was not a lonely place. It was a Middle Earth of diverse human kinds. There were the stocky, cold-adapted Neanderthals in the west, the mysterious wide-ranging Denisovans in the east. We, Homo sapiens, were the new kids on the block, pushing out of Africa, meeting these ancient cousins, trading with them, fighting them, and mating with them. There were likely others too, small island-dwelling species like Homo floresiensis, the so-called hobbits of Indonesia, who stood roughly a meter tall and hunted pygmy elephants. This is the global context for our Japanese mystery. We now know for a fact that ghost species exist. We know they can be found purely through DNA, even when physical fossils are almost non-existent. We know that interbreeding was the rule, not the exception. So, when we see that unexplained shadow in the Japanese genome, we don't have to be afraid of it, or dismiss it as an error. We have a precedent. We have a template. The precedent says, someone else was here. The question is, did this Japanese ghost belong to one of these known groups? Is it just another pulse of Denisovan DNA, perhaps a different population of them? Scientists checked. They compared the Japanese residual against the established Neanderthal and Denisovan genomes, and the answer was no. It wasn't them. It didn't fit the patterns. It wasn't a match for the Siberian Denisovans, nor was it a match for the specific Australasian Denisovan markers. It was, once again, something else. This is where the shivering starts. Because if it's not Neanderthal, and it's not Denisovan, then what is it? Could it be another cousin? A fourth major branch of humanity that lived exclusively in East Asia? Perhaps descendants of an even older migration, like Homo erectus, who somehow survived in isolation on the fringes of the continent until relatively recently. Or, perhaps more likely, but equally fascinating, could it be a ghost population of Homo sapiens themselves? A very early wave of modern humans who left Africa migrated along the warm southern coasts of Asia over 60,000 years ago, reached the Japanese archipelago before anyone else, and then disappeared. Not entirely, of course. They didn't just vanish into thin air. They would have been here when the ancestors of the Jomon arrived. They would have been the true first inhabitants. Imagine them. A people with no name. They would have seen a Japan that was completely different. A Japan connected to the mainland by land bridges, because so much of the world's water was locked up in massive glacial ice sheets. They might have walked from what is now Korea or Shanghai across vast grassy plains that are now the bottom of the East China Sea. They would have hunted herds of Nauman's elephants, ancient creatures related to modern elephants that once roamed Japan. They lived here, perhaps for thousands of years, in complete isolation. They adapted to the unique environments of these islands. They developed their own language, their own myths, their own way of seeing the stars. And then the Jomon ancestors arrived. Maybe they came from the north, cold-adapted mammoth hunters. Maybe they came later as the world warmed. When these two groups met, it wasn't just a meeting of tribes. It was a meeting of worlds separated by tens of thousands of years of different evolutionary pressures. Did they fight? Did they trade? We have no idea. But we know they must have mixed, because that is what humans do. We always mix. And in that mixing, the smaller, older population was slowly absorbed. Their unique culture, their language, their stories, all of it overwhelmed by the more numerous newcomers. Eventually, they ceased to exist as a separate people. They became just a ghost in the blood of the Jomon. And then the Jomon themselves were overwhelmed by the Yayoi, and later mixed with the Kofun, layer upon layer, ghost upon ghost. Our fourth ancestor is buried deep under these strata of history. It's a signal that is faint, barely a whisper, detectable only by the most powerful supercomputers we have ever built. But it is there. It is a stubborn refusal of our biological history to be simple. It is a reminder that every inch of this planet has been a home to someone who lived a life as vivid and urgent and real as our own, even if we have forgotten their name. So, we have ruled out the usual suspects. It's not a known cousin. It's something unique to this corner of Asia. Now the hunt begins in earnest. We have a genetic echo, but we need a body. We need a location. We need to find where this ghost might have actually lived to see if we can find any physical trace of them left behind in the earth. We need to look at the fringes, the edges of the map, where ancient things tend to survive the longest. We need to go north, to the frozen silence of Hokkaido and beyond, and we need to go south, to the sun-drenched coral caves of Okinawa. The ghost is waiting for us. Let's be precise about what we are hunting. This unreadable sequence, this ghost, is not just a vague feeling or a statistical rounding error. It is a tangible, physical string of code. It is a series of adenines, guanines, cytosines, and thymines, the A, G, C, and T's of our genetic book, that have been sequenced, copied, and stared at by scientists on a computer screen. When they run this sequence through our vast global databases, comparing it to the genomes of modern French people, or Han Chinese, or South African Kung, or indigenous Australians, the database returns a null, a no match found. When they compare it to the ancient DNA extracted from 4,000-year-old Scandinavian farmers or 40,000-year-old Siberian hunters, it still finds no match. It's like finding a paragraph of text in a diary, written in a language that looks vaguely familiar but isn't in any known dictionary. You can copy the letters, you can see the shapes of the words, but you cannot find the key to translate it. It is a biological cryptogram. So, how do you hunt for the origin of such a sequence? Where do you even begin to look for a people who left no other trace? The answer is simple. You go to the edges. You go to the fringes of the map, to the places where the great, simplifying tides of history, the tides of the Yayoi and K-pop, washed in with the least amount of force. The center of Japan, the main island of Honshu, was the heartland of the Yayoi and Kofun revolutions. The ancient Jomon signals there were overwhelmed, overwritten by the sheer demographic force of the newcomers. But the fringes, the far north and the far south, these were different. Our first destination is the far north, the vast, cold, and beautiful island of Hokkaido. Today, it's a land of snow festivals and pristine forests, but in ancient times it was a world unto itself, a natural fortress separated from the main island by the treacherous Tsugaru Strait. This is the homeland of the Ainu, a people who are absolutely essential to our search. But here is the crucial distinction we must make. The Ainu are not the ghost. They are the guardians of the known. The Ainu people, along with the Ryokuans in the far south, are our most direct genetic link to the Jomon themselves. They are the baseline. Because Hokkaido was cold, and because it was ill-suited to the rice paddy agriculture that the Yayoi brought, the Yayoi wave never truly crested there. The Jomon culture, which we call post-Jomon in Hokkaido, simply continued, evolving on its own path, eventually becoming the Ainu culture. Because of this relative isolation, the Ainu people retain the highest percentage of Jomon DNA of anyone on Earth. To study them is to look back into the Jomon world. Their language is a perfect example. The Ainu language is a linguistic isolate. That means it is completely unrelated to Japanese, or Korean, or Chinese, or any other language on the planet. It is the last surviving tongue from a world that has otherwise vanished, a linguistic fossil. Their spiritual world, too, gives us a glimpse of what Jomon beliefs might have been. At the center of it is the Kamui, the spirits or gods that exist in all things, in the fire, the water, the trees, and, most importantly, in the animals. The most famous Ainu ceremony, the Iyomante, was the bear ceremony. When a bear was captured as a cub, it would be raised in the village, sometimes even nursed by the women, treated as a cherished guest. Then, at a great ceremony, it would be ritually sacrificed, its spirit sent back to the divine world with great joy and reverence, with the understanding that it would then return to the Aam in the form of more bears for the people to hunt. This is not the worldview of a farmer, worried about crops. It is the worldview of a hunter, bound in a sacred reciprocal pact with the animals they depend on. Understanding the Ainu is our first step. By sequencing Ainu DNA, we get the clearest possible picture of ancestor number 1, the Jomon. It allows us to build a Jomon filter. We can now look at the DNA of a mainland Japanese person and say, all right, this part is Yayoi, Kofun, and this part, right here, is Jomon. And then, there is still something left over. Even in the Ainu themselves, the signal is not perfectly clean. That unreadable sequence, that ghost, is also present in the Ainu. This is a shocking revelation. It means the ghost is not Yayoi. It's not Kofun. It is something woven into the Jomon baseline itself. The ghost, it seems, is even older than the Jomon. Or perhaps it was a neighbor that mixed with the Jomon at the dawn of their history. This is where the hunt truly begins. We are in Hokkaido, we have our Jomon baseline, and we find our ghost is already here. So we must ask, were the Jomon, or their ancestors, the only people in this vast, cold north? History is almost never a simple layer cake. It's a messy stew, and for centuries, archaeologists in Hokkaido were finding traces of another, stranger culture, mixed in with the Jomon sites. They found different kinds of pottery, different tools, different houses. They found a people who didn't seem to live in the forests, but on the sea. This was the Okhotsk culture. They were not Jomon. They were a distinct group of maritime hunters who seemed to have migrated down from the Amur River basin in Siberia and Sakhalin Island, starting around the 5th century A.D. They were specialists. Their entire lives revolved around the cold northern sea. They were formidable hunters of seals, sea lions, and even whales. Their villages were built right on the coastlines, their homes filled with the bones of these great sea mammals. Their tools were different. Barbed harpoons, different kinds of knives. Their pottery was plainer, more functional, and their beliefs were different too. While the Ainu revered the brown bear of the forest, the Okhotsk people had a different obsession, the seal. And their rituals, particularly their bear rituals, were different. They would meticulously arrange the skulls of bears on altars, a practice distinct from the Ainu Ayomante. For almost 1,000 years, the Okhotsk and the Ainu's ancestors, the Satsumon culture, lived as neighbors. Sometimes on the same beaches, in the same river valleys. They traded. They must have known each other. And then, around the 12th or 13th century, the Okhotsk culture simply vanishes from the archaeological record. Their distinct pottery stops being made. Their unique village sites are abandoned. Where did they go? Did they sail back north? Were they wiped out by a changing climate? Or were they simply absorbed? Did they, as a small specialist group, slowly intermarry with the more numerous Ainu Satsumon until their language and culture were dissolved, leaving only their DNA behind? This is candidate number 1. The Okhotsk people are a perfect fit for a ghost. They were a distinct, non-Jomon population. They were in the right place at the right time. They were in direct contact with the Jomon Te Ainu, and they disappeared in a way that strongly suggests admixture rather than total annihilation. The unreadable sequence could be the Okhotsk signature. It could be the last genetic trace of these Siberian sea mammal hunters, now woven into the genomes of the Ainu, and, by extension, into all Japanese people. Scientists are working right now, extracting ancient DNA from the bones of Okhotsk individuals to compare their genomes directly to the ghost sequence. The answer is coming. But what if the ghost is even older than that? What if the Okhotsk are just another layer, and the real mystery lies deeper? To find that, we have to look beyond Hokkaido, to the source. We must go to Siberia itself. Let's go to the Amur River Basin, the homeland of the Okhotsk, and let's go even further. To the shores of the world's oldest and deepest lake, Lake Baikal. This vast, frozen sea in the heart of Siberia is a cradle of humanity. And here, in a place called Devil's Gate Cave, archaeologists found the ancient bones of hunter-gatherers who lived 13,000 years ago. When they sequenced their DNA, they got a jolt. It wasn't a match for ancient Europeans. It wasn't a match for ancient Chinese. But it was a very, very close match to the Jomon. Let that sink in. We found Jomon-like DNA in Siberia. This gives us a new hypothesis, the brother hypothesis. Sometime around 20,000 years ago or more, a common ancestral population lived in this region of Northeast Asia. For some reason, perhaps a changing climate, perhaps following migrating herds, they split. One group went south and east, eventually crossing the land bridges or narrow seas into Japan, where they became the Jomon. Another group stayed, living around Lake Baikal and the Amur River. The Jomon in Japan became isolated by the rising seas, and their genetics drifted in one direction. The Siberian brothers stayed on the continent, mixing with other waves of people, and their genetics drifted in another. Now, what if there wasn't just one brother? What if that original ancestral population was not 2 groups, but 3, or 4, or more? What if our unreadable sequence is the genetic memory of a 3rd brother? A lost sibling population that also lived in this ancient Siberian heartland, mixed with the ancestors of the Jomon before they left for Japan. But then, unlike the Jomon, this lost group died out completely on the mainland. In this scenario, the ghost isn't a person who ever set foot in Japan. The ghost is an ancestral memory, a genetic scar that the Jomon people carried with them when they first arrived. It is the DNA of a long-dead relative, a population that has no other descendants on Earth, preserved only in the blood of the Jomon who carried it south. So our journey to the north has given us 2 powerful candidates, both shrouded in the mists of time. Is the ghost the Okhotsk people, the mysterious sea hunters who lived as neighbors to the Ainu and then vanished into their bloodline? Or is it something far, far older? A lost brother from the heart of Siberia, whose genetic echo was carried into Japan at the dawn of the Jomon era. The mystery, it seems, only deepens. We have found clues, strong ones, but no definitive body. The unreadable sequence remains, for now, unread. And the North is only half of the story. We must now turn our attention to the complete opposite end of the archipelago. We must go south to the tropical islands and deep coral caves of Okinawa, where an entirely different and perhaps even more ancient candidate awaits. Our search is far from over. This story is still being written, in labs and in archaeological digs right now. And if you want to be there as we continue to follow these threads, as we hunt for this ghost in the south, and as new scientific discoveries are made, perhaps you'll consider joining this expedition. Subscribing and clicking that notification bell ensures you won't miss the next chapter of this journey as we descend together into the heart of this incredible human mystery. The cold, wind-swept plains of Siberia are a compelling, logical place to search for an origin. But what if logic, in this case, is a misdirection? What if the key to this ancient mystery isn't ice, but water? What if our ghost didn't walk into Japan, but paddled? Let us leave the frozen north and travel 2,500 kilometers to the complete opposite end of the archipelago. We are going south to the Ryukyu Islands, a long, beautiful, and dangerous chain of subtropical islands that drip from the southern tip of Kyushu, stretching almost all the way to Taiwan. This is the land of Okinawa, a place of typhoons, coral reefs, and a history as deep and distinct as its northern counterpart. Just as the Ainu in Hokkaido are the northern bookend of the Jomon world, the indigenous Ryukyuan people are the southern one. For centuries, they were a proud, independent kingdom, a maritime crossroads of Asia, trading with China, Japan, and all of Southeast Asia. Because of this relative isolation and a different history of mixing, their genetics also preserve a massive, foundational layer of Jomon ancestry. But it is a different Jomon. When we compare the ancient DNA of a northern Jomon from Hokkaido with a southern Jomon from Kyushu or Okinawa, we find they are as different from each other as a modern Swede is from a modern Italian. They are clearly related, both part of the same Jomon family, but they had been separated for thousands of years, long enough to drift into distinct populations. This confirms our model. Jomon was never a single, unified people. It was a vast, diverse mosaic of tribes spread across an entire archipelago. And when scientists look for our ghost in the Ryukyuan DNA, they find it. It's there, just as it was in the Ainu, just as it is in the mainland Japanese. It is woven into the very fabric of the southern Jomon baseline. This is a critical, earth-shattering clue. The fact that the ghost is present in both the northernmost and southernmost Jomon populations, two groups that were deeply separated, tells us one of two things. Either the ghost is a lost brother from Siberia that the Jomon ancestors carried with them before they even arrived and split, or the ghost was a separate third population that was already in Japan, coast to coast, before the Jomon ancestors even arrived, and who mixed with all of them. And it is here, in the South, that the evidence for that second, more radical theory comes exploding out of the ground. In the 1970s, in a quarry on the main island of Okinawa, workers broke into a limestone fissure. Inside, they found a jumble of ancient, fossilized bones, stained red by the earth. They were human. Scientists descended on the site, and what they unearthed would rewrite Japanese history. The site was Minatogawa. The bones belonged to at least 5 individuals, men and women, and they were old. Not just Jomon old. Older. Radiocarbon dating placed them at over 20,000 years old. This was a bombshell, 20,000 years ago. That is the last glacial maximum, the absolute peak of the Ice Age, a time when a third of the planet's surface was covered in 1-mile-high sheets of ice. This discovery created an impossible problem. The map. We know that during the Ice Age, so much water was locked up in the glaciers that sea levels were over 100 meters lower than they are today. Japan's main islands were connected to each other and, at times, to the Korean peninsula and the Asian mainland. That is how the Nauman's elephants and the first walking humans got there. But Okinawa was different. The Ryukyu archipelago is the peak of a massive underwater mountain range, rising from the deep ocean floor. Even at the peak of the Ice Age, when the seas were at their lowest, the Ryukyu Islands were never connected to mainland Asia. They were never connected to Taiwan. They were always islands, separated from the continent by a deep, wide, and lethally dangerous channel of open ocean. So, how did the Minetagawa people get there? They couldn't have walked. They didn't accidentally drift. You cannot accidentally drift a breeding population of men, women, and children. The statistical impossibility of that is astronomical. The only answer, the only conclusion, no matter how much it shattered our old timelines, was that they sailed. They did not just have rafts to cross a river, they had boats, they had seaworthy vessels, and they didn't just get in and hope, they had intention. They looked at the horizon, at a faint smudge of land or a cloud pattern that suggested an island, and they aimed for it. They had to navigate. They had to understand currents. They had to pack supplies. They had to have the courage to paddle out into the unknown, leaving the safety of the land behind, with no guarantee of return. This is not a picture of a primitive caveman. This is a picture of an explorer. This finding in Okinawa, along with the even older discovery that people had reached Australia 65,000 years ago, a continent also never connected to Asia, requiring multiple sophisticated sea crossings, forces us to completely reevaluate our ancestors. We had systematically, arrogantly underestimated them. The open ocean was not a barrier to them, it was a highway. And so we have our candidate number 2, the Paleolithic seafarers. Who were these Minetagawa people? When we look at their few precious skeletons, their skulls are different. They are small, delicate, and anatomically distinct from the rugged, classic Jomon who would come later. They look different. The hypothesis is this: they were the first wave. They were Homo sapiens, yes, but they were part of that great initial coastal migration out of Africa, 50 or 60,000 years ago. A wave of people who never went inland, who specialized in the sea. They followed the coastlines of India, of Southeast Asia, island hopping, living on shellfish and marine resources generation after generation. And sometime around 30 or 40,000 years ago, they built their boats, and they found the Ryukyu Islands. They were the first humans to ever set foot on what would one day be called Japan. They lived there, in these southern islands, in total isolation, for 10 or 15,000 years. An entire civilization, born and died, that we know nothing about. Then, much later, the next wave of people arrived, the ancestors of the Jomon, perhaps coming down from the north or crossing over from Korea. These Jomon were more numerous. They had their own distinct culture. And they met these first people. Just as the Okhotsk in the north were absorbed by the Ainu, this tiny, ancient population of seafarers was absorbed by the more numerous southern Jomon. they intermarried. Their bloodlines merged. Their unique language, their seafaring myths, their entire identity as a separate people dissolved. It was another gentle extinction, an extinction by assimilation. And all that is left of them, all that remains of this entire lost civilization of Paleolithic explorers, are those few red bones in the Minatogawa quarry, and a faint, unreadable sequence of DNA that now lives in the blood of every Japanese person today. This is a spectacular, romantic, and compelling theory. It fits the bones. It fits the genetics. It fits the geography. But for decades, it had one giant hole in it. Could they actually do it? Was it plausible for people with only stone tools to build a boat capable of crossing one of the most dangerous stretches of water on Earth? The channel between Taiwan and Okinawa is home to the Kuroshio Current. It's not a gentle river. It's a 100-kilometer-wide, 6-knot-fast monster, an oceanic superhighway that can smash a vessel or sweep it hopelessly out to sea. For decades, scientists debated. Then, a few years ago, a team of Japanese researchers decided to stop talking and to do it. The project was called the 30,000-Year Voyage. The goal? Replicate the journey from Taiwan to the nearest Ryukyu island of Yonaguni, using only Paleolithic materials and methods. No metal, no modern clothes, no GPS, no maps, other than the ones in their heads. It was a nightmare of experimental archaeology. Their first attempt with bamboo rafts was a disaster. The rafts were stable, but they couldn't be steered. The Kuroshio Current, as predicted, grabbed them and threw them wildly off course. They had to be rescued. Failure. They realized they needed a boat, not a raft, something they could steer. They went to Taiwan, and using stone axes, it took them months to fell a single massive tree. They began to hollow it out, burning and chipping, an agonizingly slow process. They were trying to build a dugout canoe. Their first attempts were too heavy or too unstable. More failures. They were on the verge of giving up, concluding it was impossible. But they tried one more time. They found a different kind of wood. They perfected their stone axe technique. They carved a long, 7.6-meter dugout canoe. It was crude, but it was functional. In July of 2019, a team of 5 Japanese and Taiwanese paddlers, men and women, set off from the eastern coast of Taiwan. They aimed for an island they could not see. They navigated by the sun, by the direction of the swells, and at night by the stars. The current fought them every second. They paddled in shifts, non-stop, for 2 days. They were exhausted, dehydrated, and blistered. And then, after 45 grueling hours, a dark line appeared on the horizon. They had done it. They paddled through the surf and collapsed on the beach of Yonaguni Island. The experiment was a success. It was no longer a theory. They had proven that this impossible Stone Age voyage was, in fact, possible. It required immense skill, unbelievable courage, and a deep, intimate knowledge of the sea. But it was possible. This changes our image of the ghost completely. Our candidate is no longer just a lost brother from a frozen cave. Our candidate is now a mariner, a person with salt in their hair and the sun on their face, a person who understood the stars, who faced the open ocean, and who won. We now have 2 powerful and completely different candidates, the ghost in the ice or the ghost in the sea, a hunter from the north or a sailor from the south. The mystery, it seems, is split in 2. But this new seafaring hypothesis, proven by that heroic 2019 experiment, opens up an even more profound and unsettling question. If they lived on the coast, and they arrived when the seas were 100 meters lower, where are all their villages? Where are their graves? Where is all their stuff? The answer is terrifying. It's in the one place we haven't been able to look. Our ghost is a sailor, and their entire world is now at the bottom of the ocean. The 2019 expedition proved the how, but it didn't fully answer the who. To find the identity of these first seafarers, we need more than just a successful boat trip. We need hard, physical evidence that connects the distant southern islands to the main Japanese archipelago, linking these ancient mariners to the broader story of Japan's peopling. And, incredibly, we found it. Not in a bone, but in a stone. Obsidian is volcanic glass. It's black, shiny, and when you nap it, when you strike it just right, it fractures with an edge sharper than a modern surgical scalpel. For Paleolithic people, obsidian was the ultimate high-tech material. It was their steel. But obsidian doesn't just appear anywhere. It only forms under very specific volcanic conditions. Each volcano's obsidian has a unique chemical fingerprint, a distinct ratio of trace elements. If you find an obsidian arrowhead in Tokyo, a geologist can analyze it and tell you exactly which mountain it came from. 30,000 years ago, on the main island of Honshu, near modern-day Tokyo, ancient people were making tools out of this black glass. When scientists analyzed the chemical fingerprint of these tools, they expected it to match local sources, obsidian from the nearby mountains of Nagano or Hakone. But the results were shocking. The obsidian didn't come from Honshu. It came from an island called Kozushima. Kozushima is a small volcanic island in the Izu chain, south of Tokyo. Today, you can take a high-speed ferry there in a few hours. But 30,000 years ago, during the Ice Age, Kozushima was still an island. It was never connected to the mainland by a land bridge. To get there, you had to cross at least 50 kilometers of open ocean. Let that sink in. 30,000 years ago, 10,000 years before the peak of the last Ice Age, 20,000 years before the first pottery of the Jomon. Someone on mainland Japan needed the best stone for their tools. They didn't just settle for what was nearby. They organized an expedition. They got into boats. They paddled 50 kilometers out into the Pacific Ocean to a specific island they knew had the best volcanic glass. They mined it, loaded it into their boats, and paddled 50 kilometers back. This wasn't a one-time accident. We find this Kozushima obsidian in archaeological sites all over central Japan, spanning thousands of years. This was a regular, organized trade route. It implies a level of sophistication, planning, and maritime skill that is absolutely staggering for that deep in prehistory. These weren't just people scraping by on the edge of survival. These were masters of their environment. They knew the ocean, they knew the islands, and they had the technology to exploit them. So, who were they? They are the best candidates we have for our southern ghost. They were likely related to the Minatogawa people of Okinawa, part of that same initial coastal migration that swept up from Southeast Asia. They were the true pioneers, the first ones to see Mount Fuji from the deck of a canoe, thousands of years before anyone walked there from Korea. But if they were so capable, so established, why did they vanish? Why did their distinct genetic signature get overwhelmed? The answer might lie in the very thing that gave them their edge, the sea. These were coastal people. Their entire way of life, Their food, their trade, their travel depended on the ocean. They would have built their villages right on the beach, near the mouths of rivers where fresh water met the salt water, the richest ecosystems on the planet. And that is precisely why we can't find them. Around 15,000 years ago, the world began to warm. The great ice sheets over North America and Europe began to melt. Vast quantities of water, locked up for millennia, poured back into the oceans. Sea levels didn't just creep up. In geological terms, they skyrocketed. Over a few thousand years, the global sea level rose by over 100 meters. That's the height of a 30-story skyscraper. Imagine the coastline of Japan today. Now imagine it with the water 100 meters lower. It would be a completely different country. The Tokyo Bay didn't exist. It was a wide, grassy valley with a river running through it. The Seto Inland Sea was a series of plains. Our Paleolithic seafarers lived on that lost coast. As the waters rose, century after century, their beaches drowned. They would have had to move their villages inland again and again. Each time they moved, the ocean swallowed their old homes, their burial grounds, their workshops. The rising sea was a slow-motion apocalypse for their culture. It didn't just destroy their homes, it fundamentally changed their world. The currents they knew shifted. The shellfish beds they relied on were drowned in water too deep to dive. The sea roads they used to travel between islands became wider, more dangerous, or disappeared entirely as islands shrank. By the time the sea levels stabilized around 10,000 years ago, creating the Japan we know today, the world of these first seafarers was gone. It was drowned. They were forced inland, pushed into the wooded hills and mountains that they were less adapted to. And it was exactly then, in this chaos of a changing world, that the ancestors of the Jomon, who were perhaps better adapted to the inland forests, hunting deer and boar, began to thrive. The ghost population, stressed by climate change, their best lands lost to the rising ocean, was slowly overwhelmed and absorbed by the expanding Jomon. Their villages are still there, of course. They are just waiting for us. They are sitting silently on the continental shelves, under 30, 50, or 100 meters of water, covered in silt and sand. This is the next great frontier in this mystery: underwater archaeology. It's incredibly difficult and expensive. You can't just walk around looking for arrowheads. You need sonar, remotely operated vehicles, and brave divers working in pitch blackness. But the technology is catching up. We are starting to map these submerged landscapes. We can see the old river channels that are now on the sea floor. We know where to look. It is only a matter of time before a robotic submersible's light sweeps across the darkness of the ocean floor and illuminates something that shouldn't be there. A stone circle, a hearth, a pile of carefully knapped obsidian tools. Sitting exactly where they were left 15,000 years ago, before the Great Flood came. Until that day, the Paleolithic seafarers remain a ghost whose shadow we see in our DNA, whose skill we see in the obsidian of Kozushima, and whose fate was likely sealed by the very ocean they once mastered. They are the Atlantis of Japan, not a city of gold, but a lost civilization of mariners, drowned not in a single day of cataclysm, but slowly, inexorably, by the warming of the world. The rising sea wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a fundamental rewriting of the world map. To understand the scale of this, we need to look at the event known as the Jomon transgression. For tens of thousands of years, the world had been locked in a deep freeze. Miles thick ice sheets pinned down vast quantities of the planet's water. But around 15,000 years ago, the Great Thaw began. It wasn't a steady, gentle drip. It came in pulses, massive meltwater events that sent sea levels surging upwards, sometimes by meters in a single century. Imagine living through that. You build your village on a safe, high terrace overlooking the beach. It's a good spot, sheltered from the wind, close to the clam beds. Your grandfather built his house here. But within your own lifetime, the high tide starts reaching your doorstep. The storms begin to wash away the burial markers of your ancestors. You have to move. You pack up everything, your tools, your precious obsidian cores, the bones of your loved ones, and you move uphill, maybe half a kilometer inland. You clear new land, build new shelters, and then, 2 generations later, your grandchildren have to do the exact same thing. This relentless, centuries-long retreat from the rising ocean would have been deeply traumatic. It wasn't just about losing real estate. It was about losing connection to sacred places. The caves where they painted their myths, the headlands where they lit signal fires, the reefs where they taught their children to dive. All of it was being swallowed by an unstoppable, rising god. By the time the waters stabilized around 7,000 years ago, creating the coastlines we recognize today, Japan had lost a staggering amount of land. The vast, fertile plains that once connected Kyushu to Korea were gone, replaced by the Tsushima Strait. The land bridge to Sakhalin in the north was severed. Japan was no longer a peninsula of Asia. It was truly an archipelago, isolated by deep water on all sides. For our coastal ghost population, this was a catastrophe. Their best territory, the rich, flat coastal plains, was gone. They were pushed into the interior, into the steep, heavily forested mountains that make up 70% of Japan's landmass. This new environment favored a different kind of specialist. It favored the people who already knew how to hunt boar in dense undergrowth, who knew which mountain nuts were edible and how to leach the toxins out of them. It favored the ancestors of the Jomon. As the ghosts were pushed inland, they inevitably came into conflict or contact with these expanding Jomon populations. They were refugees in their own land. Over time, outnumbered and outcompeted in this new, forested world, they did what humans always do. They integrated. They married into Jomon villages. Their distinct language would have slowly faded, replaced by the dominant tongue of the interior tribes. Their unique sea gods might have been merged into the Jomon pantheon, and their physical traces, their own distinct settlements, were left behind, preserved in a perfect oxygen-poor time capsule under the sea. Archaeology on land is hard enough. You have to deal with erosion, acidic soil that eats bones, and thousands of years of later human activity. Farmers plowing up fields, modern cities built on top of ancient ones. But underwater archaeology has a different set of problems. It's expensive, dangerous, and technically demanding. Yet, it is our best hope. Because the sea, while destructive when it's rising, can also be incredibly protective once it's settled. Things that would rot away on land in a decade can last for thousands of years, if buried in anaerobic seafloor silt. We already have tantalizing hints. Fishermen in the Sado Inland Sea sometimes pull up strange things in their nets. Ancient elephant teeth, stone tools that don't look quite like Jomon ones. These are accidental finds, ripped from their context, but they prove the submerged landscape was once inhabited. The real treasure hunt is just beginning. Using advanced side-scan sonar and sub-bottom profilers, geologists can now see through the layers of sand on the seafloor. They can map the ancient river valleys that are now drowned canyons. They can spot the flat terraces that would have made perfect village sites 10,000 years ago. Once these high-potential target areas are identified, the next step is sending down remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, underwater drones equipped with high-definition cameras and robotic arms. It's like exploring another planet. The ROV glides silently through the darkness, its lights illuminating a landscape that hasn't seen the sun since the end of the Ice Age. Imagine the moment. The camera pans across a featureless expanse of gray silt, and then, suddenly, a shape emerges. Not a natural rock formation, but something geometric. A circle of stones, clearly arranged by human hands, an ancient hearth. Near it, a scattering of black, glassy flakes, the debris from someone napping a Kozushima obsidian spear point 12,000 years ago. Finding such a site would be the holy grail of Japanese archaeology. It would be a pristine, undisturbed window into the world of our ghost. We might find their tools exactly where they dropped them. We might find the post holes of their houses. We might even, if we are incredibly lucky, find a burial, a skeleton preserved by the unique chemistry of the seafloor mud, its DNA intact enough to finally give a face to our mysterious ancestor. It's a race against time, though. Trawling nets from massive, modern fishing vessels are scraping the bottom of the sea, potentially destroying these fragile sites before we even find them. And offshore wind farm developments, while necessary for our future, involve driving massive piles into the seabed, which could inadvertently smash through precisely the kind of drowned archaeological treasures we are looking for. We are standing on the edge of a new era of discovery. The ocean is no longer just a blank blue space on the map. It is a vast museum waiting to be opened. The story of Japan, and perhaps the story of all coastal humanity, is hidden down there in the cold and the dark. It's amazing to think about, isn't it? A whole hidden history just waiting under the waves. It makes you wonder what else is out there that we haven't found yet. I'd love to know where you're listening from right now. Are you near the coast yourself, or maybe somewhere far inland? And what time is it in your part of the world? Let me know in the comments. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. We are not just waiting for submersibles to get lucky. The hunt for the ghost has moved from the macro scale of oceans and landscapes down to the microscopic level, to the very molecules of the dirt itself. We are entering the era of forensic archaeology, where we no longer even need a body to find a person. For over a century, archaeology was a treasure hunt. You dug until you hit something hard, a stone tool, a piece of pottery, a bone. If you didn't find an object, you assumed no one had been there. But we now know that ancient people left behind far more than just their trash. They left behind themselves, in a constant, invisible rain of biological material. Every time you scratch your skin, you shed thousands of microscopic skin cells. Every time you go to the bathroom, every time you bleed a little from a cut, even every time you just breathe out in a damp cave, you are ejecting your DNA into the environment. We call this environmental DNA, or eDNA. In the past, this was just invisible noise. But today, our sequencing technology is so sensitive that we can take a teaspoon of dirt from a cave floor, tens of thousands of years old, and find the genetic ghosts of everything that ever lived in that cave. We can find the DNA of the cave bears that hibernated there. We can find the DNA of the ancient hyenas that denned there. And, crucially, we can find the DNA of the humans who sought shelter there for a night, perhaps sitting by a fire, shedding a few hairs before moving on. This is a complete game-changer for our Japanese mystery. Remember, the biggest problem we have is Japan's acidic soil. It eats bones. In many Paleolithic sites in Japan, we find stone tools, beautiful, undeniable evidence of human presence, but absolutely zero human remains. The people are gone, but their dirt is still there. Right now, researchers are going back to those famous empty archaeological sites. They are taking core samples of the sediment layers, freezing them, and taking them to ultra-clean labs. They are dissolving that ancient dirt and fishing out the tiny, fragmented strands of DNA that have survived for 30 or 40,000 years, bound to clay particles, protected from the acid. Imagine the scene in the lab. A technician in a full hazmat suit, because a single flake of their own modern dandruff would contaminate the entire sample, is staring at a computer screen as the sequencer finishes its run. Suddenly, out of the chaotic background noise of billions of soil bacteria genomes, a clear signal emerges. It's human. It's 38,000 years old. And it doesn't match the Jomon. That is the moment we are waiting for. That is the moment the ghost becomes real. We might find them in a cave in Kyushu, or buried deep under a peat bog in central Honshu, where the lack of oxygen has preserved their genetic signature. We don't need a skull anymore. We just need the ground they walked on. But eDNA is just one tool in our new high-tech arsenal. The other is far more abstract and perhaps even more powerful: artificial intelligence. We have already seen how AI was used to find the ghost in the first place, by noticing the statistical anomaly in modern genomes. But that was just AI 1.0. The next generation of AI won't just tell us that something is missing. It will try to rebuild what is missing. Think of it like a shredded document. We don't have the original paper, the ancient ghost population. But we have millions of tiny, shredded pieces of that document, scattered and hidden inside the filing cabinets of millions of modern Japanese people. Each of us might carry only a tiny, fragmented sentence of that original ghost genome. A human could never read all those millions of genomes and find the matching pieces. It's too much data. But an AI, specifically a deep learning neural network designed for pattern recognition, can. It can look at your genome, and your neighbors, and a person's in Osaka, and a person's in Hokkaido. It can identify those tiny, unreadable fragments in each of you, and then it can start to stitch them together. Fragment A from person 1 looks like it fits perfectly with fragment B from person 10,000. Bit by bit, piece by piece, the AI can virtually reassemble the complete genome of a person who has been dead for 20,000 years. It's called genomic reconstruction. We are essentially bringing the ghost back to life, not in a test tube, but inside a computer simulation. Once we have that reconstructed genome, we can do amazing things. We can't bring them back like Jurassic Park, but we can read their genetic code to see what they were like. We can look at the genes that determine physical appearance. Did they have the thick, straight hair typical of many East Asians, or something wavier like the Jomon? What was their skin tone? Did they have genetic adaptations for deep-sea diving, like some modern sea nomad populations in Southeast Asia do? We might even find clues to their demise. Did their genome show signs of massive inbreeding towards the end, suggesting their population had collapsed to just a few tiny, isolated groups before they were finally absorbed? Or do we see evidence of ancient epidemics, diseases that might have wiped them out when they first encountered the new Jomon arrivals? The future of studying the past is no longer just about shovels and brushes. It's about server farms and clean rooms. We are moving from an era of finding history to an era of decoding it. The ghost may have left no bones that survived the acid soil, and their homes may be under 100 meters of ocean, but they could not escape the inevitable biological trail they left behind. Their code is still here, in the dirt under our feet, and in the blood in our veins, just waiting for us to build a machine smart enough to read it. This brings us to a profound realization. The ghost isn't really gone. It has just been broken down into a billion encrypted pieces. And we, the living people of today, are the unwitting arcs that have carried this data through thousands of years of history, keeping it safe until we were finally ready to understand it. We are the guardians of our own ancestors' lost secrets. Fan 9. It's tempting to look in the mirror and try to see them. For decades, we've been told a simple story about Japanese faces. You have the Jomon face. Rugged, deep-set eyes, double eyelids, thicker beards for men. Or the Yayoi face. Flatter, single eyelids. Thinner, lighter-skinned. It's a popular parlor game. A way to feel connected to the deep past by looking at the shape of your own nose. But just like the Three Ancestor model, this binary is a comfortable fiction. When physical anthropologists actually measure ancient skulls, thousands of them, from all over Japan and from every conceivable era, they don't find two neat piles. They find a spectrum. They find chaos. Yes, there are classic examples at the extreme ends of the spectrum. But the vast majority of ancient people, and certainly the vast majority of modern people, fall somewhere in the messy middle. A person might have a Jomon-like jaw but Yayoi-like cheekbones. They might have the deep-set eyes of a hunter-gatherer but the dental structure of a rice farmer. And sometimes they find skulls that don't fit either pattern. Skulls with unique cranial vault shapes, or strange toothwear patterns that suggest a completely different diet or way of using their teeth as tools. Are these just random variations, or are they the rare, fleeting physical glimpses of our ghost? Perhaps the ghost ancestors didn't have just one look. If they were a diverse group of seafarers and coastal dwellers, they might have had a variety of features that have since been blended away, like different colors of paint mixed into a single bucket of gray. Their defining features, maybe a specific skin tone adapted to the intense glare of the sun on the open ocean, or a particular build suited for paddling long distances, have been diluted by 10,000 years of intermixing with the far more numerous Jomon and Yayoi populations. This brings us to the most poignant realization of our entire journey. Extinction doesn't always mean death. It doesn't always mean a dramatic, violent end with the last survivor taking a final breath alone in a cave. Sometimes, extinction is gentle. It is an act of love, not war. Think of that metaphor again, the drop of ink in a glass of water. When that first small group of Paleolithic seafarers, maybe only a few hundred or a few thousand strong, met the expanding waves of Jomon tribes, they didn't necessarily fight. They likely traded, They shared food, and inevitably they fell in love. A sailor from the Ghost tribe marries a hunter from the Jomon tribe. Their children are half and half. They speak a mix of both languages, perhaps, or just the dominant one. Those children then marry into other Jomon families. With each generation, the ghost ink becomes fainter and fainter. The unique cultural practices, the specific songs they sang to the sea spirits, the exact way they tattooed their faces, are slowly forgotten, replaced by the stronger, more numerous traditions of the majority. Eventually, there is no one left who speaks the old language. No one left who knows how to build that specific type of open ocean canoe. The culture, as a living, breathing entity, has gone extinct. It has dissolved completely into the larger whole. But it is not gone. Every single molecule of that original drop of ink is still in the glass. It has just been spread so thin that it is invisible to the naked eye. This is what happened to our fourth ancestor. They were not wiped out. They were loved out of existence. They became us. And this changes what it means to be Japanese, or indeed any nationality. We are not purebred descendants of a single heroic lineage. We are fundamentally mongrels. We are grand, beautiful, complex mixtures of winners and losers, of conquerors and the conquered, of those who stayed and those who vanished. We carry their genes. That is a scientific fact. But what we have truly lost, and what no amount of AI or eDNA will ever be able to fully recover, is their memory. Genes are just biological instructions. They can tell you how to build a liver or what color eyes to have. But they cannot tell you what a people believed. They cannot tell you the myths they told around their fires at night, about how the stars were formed or why the ocean is salty. They cannot tell you the names of their heroes, the rhythm of their music, or the things that made them laugh or cry. That is the true tragedy of the ghost lineage. We have inherited their hardware, but we have lost their software. We are walking around with the bodies they helped build, but our minds are completely severed from their way of seeing the world. Or are they? Sometimes you might feel a strange pull, a totally irrational, deep-seated emotion when you stand on a certain beach, looking out at the horizon, a feeling of déjà vu in a place you've never been. Is it just a firing of random neurons, or is it perhaps a microscopic echo? A tiny, fragmented resonance from that 1% of your DNA that remembers a time when the ocean was not a barrier, but a home. We will probably never know their true name. We will probably never hear their language spoken again. They will remain forever the faceless ancestors. But they are not gone. As long as you are here, as long as blood flows through your veins, they are here too, silently riding along on the great journey of human life. They are the quiet passengers in the vessel of your body, the forgotten pioneers who found these islands first, and who, in their own gentle way, never really left. This journey into the deep past is far from over. New discoveries are being made all the time, and who knows when the next piece of the puzzle will fall into place? If you want to stay with us as we continue to explore these lost chapters of human history, make sure you're subscribed and have that notification bell turned on. That way, you'll be the first to know when we uncover the next secret waiting in the shadows.